Imagine being erased from history before you even died, simply because you had an opinion. In 1860, your husband didn't need a legal reason to get rid of you. He just needed a cage. This was the terrifying reality on the morning of June 18, 1860, when a woman named Elizabeth Packard woke up in her house in Illinois, surrounded by her 6 children. By the time the sun went down, she was trapped behind the heavy, locked doors of the Illinois State Hospital for the Insane. She had not hurt anyone, she had not stolen anything, and she had done absolutely nothing that should have put a human being in a cage. Her only crime was that she did not agree with the things her husband said in his church talks. That was the whole reason. She had shared her own ideas about God that were different from his very strict and narrow church rules. She had gone to a class to study the Bible and told people what she honestly thought it meant. Because of this, her husband, a man named Theophilus, called the local police officer to come to their front door. He had her violently dragged away while her own kids stood there in total shock and watched it happen. 3 years went by before they finally let her go. When she finally got back to her house, she found out that her husband had sold off all of her chairs and tables. He had taken every bit of her money and rented their family home to people she didn't even know. Worst of all, he had run away to another state and taken every single one of her children with him. And here is the part that still makes me feel sick to my stomach. She had no way to fight back in court, none at all. This was because, under the laws of America in 1860, Elizabeth Packard did not count as a real person. Her husband legally owned every part of who she was, everything she had in her pockets, and everything she might ever become in the future. And I really need you to grasp something before we talk about anything else. This was not against the law. This was not a mistake in the system. This was the system doing exactly what it was built to do from the start. I started digging into this story because of something strange I kept seeing in old family records from the 1870s. You know those empty spots in family trees that people always talk about? That brick wall at the year 1870, where it suddenly becomes impossible to find any more records? I started to see a specific habit that nobody else seemed to be talking about. I saw women who simply vanished from the paperwork. In one count of the people, they are right there: a wife, a mom, an owner of land. In the next count, 10 years later, they are just gone. Their children are moved into other houses. Their land is given over to the husband. There is no record that they died. There is no record of a divorce. They are just missing. And in the thin spaces on the sides of these old papers, sometimes you can find a single little note that says, "Sent to the mental home." I wanted to find out what these women actually did that was so bad they deserved to be wiped away from their own families. What I discovered was much, much worse than I thought it would be. What I found was a set of laws built specifically to make women disappear. The rule that made all of this possible was called coverture. It sounds like a fancy word when you say it, but what it actually meant was mean and very simple. The second a woman got married, her life as a legal person ended. I don't mean that in a poetic way. I mean it literally. A famous law expert named William Blackstone, whose books helped build the entire base of American law, explained it very clearly back in 1765. He wrote, "The very being or legal existence of the woman is suspended during the marriage." Suspended. That is the exact word he chose. A married woman was not allowed to own land. She could not sign any papers or contracts. She could not keep the money she made at work. She could not sue a person, and she could not be sued by anyone else. She couldn't even write a will to leave her things to people without her husband saying yes. And most importantly, she had zero rights to keep her own children. None at all. Under the law, she was not a human being. She was just a part of her husband, like his horse or his house. She was his property, his job to watch over, and his to throw away if he felt like it. This wasn't just some weird, small rule. This was the main foundation of marriage law across the whole United States. Now, this is where the state of Illinois made things even worse than they already were. In the year 1851, the state made a law saying that there had to be a public meeting in court before anyone could be sent to the state mental hospital. You needed a trial, you needed proof, and you needed a fair process. It sounds like a good idea. It sounds like it would protect people. It's the kind of safety rule you would expect to see in a fair society. But there was one big exception hidden inside that law. There was one group of people who did not get any of those protections. The law said a husband could lock up his wife without the evidence of insanity that was required for everyone else. Those are the real words from the law book. He could do it without a public trial, without a doctor proving she was sick, without anyone ever asking her what happened, and without her saying it was okay. All it took was his name on a paper and one doctor who was willing to agree with him. And I found out that doctors back then were very, very happy to agree. The doctor who checked on Elizabeth Packard was a man named J.W. Brown. He actually lied and told her he was a man selling sewing machines just so he could talk to her. He came into her house using a fake story, asked her questions about her marriage and what she believed about God, and then he went back to her husband and said she showed a great dislike toward him. That was it. That was the whole medical checkup. That was the only proof of craziness needed to lock her in a room for 3 long years. I want to stop and say something here because I know what you might be thinking. Surely these laws were there to help weak women who couldn't take care of themselves. Surely doctors wouldn't just take a husband's word for it without doing a real, deep check. Surely there were safety nets to stop people from being mean. I wanted to believe that too. I spent weeks searching for proof that the system worked the right way. I wanted to find that only truly sick women were sent away, that families were kept safe, and that someone was checking to see if these women actually needed help. But then I found the sign-in books from the hospitals, and everything I thought I knew about this time in history fell apart. The Trans-Allegheny Mental Home in West Virginia kept very detailed books from 1864 to 1889. That is 25 years of people being sent away, all written down perfectly. You can still find them today in the state archives. The list has 105 official reasons for why people were locked up. These are not medical terms. These are the real reasons written down for why women were put behind bars. Let me read a few of them to you. Reading novels, being lazy, having fights at home, being too excited about religion, having a broken heart, imaginary female trouble, thinking too much, talking about politics, a son getting married, having a hard time with her period, or rumors that her husband might leave her. And here is the one that made my heart stop. Ill treatment by husband. Let that sink in for a second. If a woman was being hurt or abused by her husband, that was a reason to lock her in a mental home. It wasn't a reason to arrest him. It wasn't a reason for the police to check on him. It wasn't a reason to kick him out of the house. It was a reason to put her in prison. She was the one who got locked away in a cell. He got to keep the house. He got to keep the kids. He got to keep everything they owned. And what happened to her after she was sent away? She just got lost in the system. Sometimes she was there for years, sometimes for her whole life, and sometimes she actually did go crazy because the conditions inside those walls were so scary. And legally, her husband did nothing wrong at all. He followed the law exactly as it was printed. Once you see this pattern, you can't unsee it. This wasn't really about health. It was about who owned the stuff and who had the power. Under the rules of coverture, everything a wife brought into a marriage belonged to her husband. Her gifts from her family, her paychecks, her clothes, it all became his the moment they said their wedding vows. But there was one tiny problem in this plan. A woman still kept a few small rights to real estate, like land or buildings she got from her parents. If her husband wanted to sell that land, he needed her to sign a paper saying it was okay. It was a very small shield built into the law, but it was something. It gave her a tiny bit of power in a world where she had none. But that shield disappeared if she was legally insane. A woman who was called crazy had no power to say yes or no. She didn't count in court. Her land could be sold without her even knowing. Her kids could be taken away without any trial. Her whole life could be rubbed out of the family history with one single form signed by her husband and one doctor who went along with it. The pattern keeps repeating. I keep asking myself, how many of those women who vanished from the family trees went out this way? How many of the deaths written down between 1850 and 1900 were actually just women being sent to an asylum? How many families ended not because the mother died, but because she was simply deleted? The records are out there. Many are still hidden. Many were burned in fires or lost in floods. But some are still in state archives, showing thousands of lives being ruined. Thousands of women and thousands of families were ripped apart for reading books, for being excited about church, for arguing with their husbands, or for being hit by men who then took everything they had. If you think this all stopped in the 1800s, look at this. The brain surgery called a lobotomy was invented in the 1930s. By the 1940s, it was being done all the time. About 50,000 Americans had this surgery. 75% of them were women. And to get the surgery, you only needed one person to sign the paper, a husband or a father. The same legal setup that let Theophilus Packard lock up his wife in 1860 was still working in 1950. It was a different building and a different surgery, but it was the same power and the same result. Women disappeared because of a signature from a man who owned them. Elizabeth Packard spent the rest of her life fighting this. She started a group to protect people in mental homes. She wrote books about what happened to her. She went to state leaders all across the country. By 1867, she helped pass a new law in Illinois that said everyone, including married women, had the right to a trial before being locked up. She changed the law. But this part is still upsetting. The same doctor who kept Elizabeth locked up for 3 years was one of the men who later said Mary Todd Lincoln was insane in 1875. She was the widow of Abraham Lincoln, and her own son had her locked away. Even though Elizabeth's new laws meant Mary got a trial, her lawyer didn't call any people to help her. 17 people spoke against her, and she was found insane. She tried to end her own life just hours later. She was only saved because the first woman lawyer in Illinois fought to get her out. In the year 2023, the state of Illinois finally changed the name of a mental health center to honor Elizabeth Packard. Before that, it was named after the doctor who had locked her up. It took 160 years, but they finally put the right name on the door. So, yes, things got better. Laws changed. Rights were given. But I still can't stop thinking about those 125 reasons for being locked up. Reading books, being excited, having a mean husband. These weren't mistakes made by evil men. They were the official, legal, and accepted reasons that thousands of women lost their lives. And nowhere in those papers does anyone explain why reading a book was dangerous. These weren't health choices. They were power choices. The power always went one way. The records are still there in West Virginia, in Wisconsin, and in Illinois. Thousands of names. Thousands of reasons that weren't really reasons at all. And I have to wonder, how many of them are in your own family history? How many of your grandmothers just vanished around 1870? How many women were deleted from history because they had an opinion and a husband who wanted them gone?